You are about to embark on an extraordinary journey.
I have a confession to make about my most watched video, this one on vocal fry. That video explains what vocal fry or creaky voice actually is. It looks at speakers and languages that use it, and it discusses some possible explanations for why vocal fry upsets and annoys people so much. So what's my confession? I cut out a big chunk of the script at the end, which felt like it needed more research and thought. The rest of it, the part I actually filmed, was all very impartial about vocal fry, pointing out, for example, that nobody complains when men do it, or people from Finland for that matter. Whereas this other aspect of vocal fry kind of drives me nuts too. The fact is, I don't find it easy to talk about my emotions, but I know from experience that avoidance has its limitations, particularly in times of stress, anxiety and depression. At times like that, what makes all the difference is talking about it with someone else. A service I use myself is BetterHelp, the paid partner of this video. And if you're struggling, you could consider it too. It's an online platform that connects you to a therapist who's trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. I know quite a lot about speech, but as we'll see later in the video, I'm not necessarily the best, most objective person to assess my own speech. And when it comes to negative feelings, the kind that can interfere with work and sleep, my BetterHelp therapist provides that sympathetic objectivity. You start by just filling out a questionnaire on your situation and needs. I was matched with a therapist in about a day. Most matches happen within 48 hours. The online format makes it extremely convenient and flexible, but if there's one feature that I want to highlight about BetterHelp, it's the ease with which you can switch if your first match isn't as good as mine. Years ago, when I was in a very bad place, I found myself seeing a therapist who was making me feel not better, but worse and worse. But I just didn't have the wherewithal to go looking for someone else. I truly wish there'd been something like BetterHelp then. So if you think this kind of support may help you, I've put the link in the description box below, betterhelp.com/Dr. Jeff, plus a link to some research on BetterHelp kindly provided by the Cinema Therapy channel. My link will give you 10% off your first month of therapy, as well as supporting my channel. A number of commenters on my vocal fry video said that what bugs them is not just the vocal fry itself, it's the intonation that it's part of. I suspected something of this sort myself, but when I looked closer at some speakers with a lot of vocal fry, I found that there didn't seem to be anything that particular or specific about the intonation patterns that contain the vocal fry. As I said in my first video, the most common location for fry is at the end of falling intonation. Take this example.
Independence Day. Independence Day.
I'd say it was a fairly regular, average intonational fall.
Independence Day.
But what she actually said was
Independence Day. Independence Day.
In the first version, I just spliced in the word day from Google Translate.
Independence Day.
So aside from that ending in vocal fry,
Independence Day,
there's nothing that special about the intonation. And we also get vocal fry with other patterns, including rising intonation, where it can appear at the beginning.
I don't know exactly what it was about this study. All of them women.
So if people are bothered by the intonation containing vocal fry, I tend not to think that it's the intonation pattern that's bothering them, but rather the pattern's repetitiveness. Some speakers, and certainly a lot of YouTubers, use that regular falling pattern with a creaky ending again and again, and again and again and again and again.
Independence Day, stayed that way. Los Angeles, God, Doom,
voiceover,
Flex,
Potter, Iron Man,
narration,
media,
struck, story, innovate again, format,
recording,
here, found, work,
actor,
the voiceover actor.
Let's get started. What update of the app you have? Any effects I have? Really far away. There's a picture. Me on screen. And I'm not a fan of it. Here. Add them in again later. I always tend to add them in later. The beginning of your video, the whole video. Green screen videos, viral videos. In this video, my videos. TikTok videos.
I pointed out in my first video that creaky voice was also used by a lot of old received pronunciation speakers, especially men. When I was a student, I was taught that that's what vocal fry was, that thing old posh guys do at the end of their sentences. But going back to the creakiest old posh guys I could find, they didn't seem to do it so repetitively. C.S. Lewis used it a lot, if the radio talk I analysed was anything to go by.
I've had to say a good deal about prayer, the whole idea of prayer.
But he uses a wide range of other patterns too.
One moment disappears before the next comes along, from the beginning to the end of the world.
So vocal fry can catch the ear, and as I pointed out before, we can be really bothered by creaky sounds like floorboards. But what really gets me is the recurrence, the predictability, the inevitability. Similarly, if I need to watch a how-to video from, say, Patreon or Samsung, I brace myself for the repetitive vocal fry. And usually I'll have to keep pausing and replaying it because my brain focuses on the repetitive pattern and I keep missing the meaning that I came to the video for in the first place.
Stressful. Sick of it.
Choose another voice.
Of course, my problem may be exacerbated by my being a phonetician, but I have been both enchanted and bothered by sounds since childhood. I'm one of those people who will actually move to avoid a noisy eater. And noisy eating is easily the most common complaint from those who suffer from misophonia. Now, if the venting comments on my vocal fry video are anything to go by, there are not a few people who have misophonia with respect to vocal fry. But for me, it's not so much the sound itself, but that repetitiveness. I think most of us have experience of sounds, people's mannerisms or other stimuli that wouldn't be bothersome if they were occasional, but can become real stressors when they're recurrent and unavoidable. Unavoidability, of course, means loss of control over our situation. Noisy neighbours, that barking dog, a dripping tap. Ticking clocks are fine, but I guess most taps don't drip. Like most people don't have vocal fry, and I notice both when they do. And in YouTube videos, repetitive vocal fry is caused by repetitive intonation. Of course, YouTube didn't invent repetitive intonation. You can find it in old school radio and TV.
Global warming will kill us all tomorrow. They did find cocaine at the White House. The leaders of China and North Korea have declared they are in fact friends with benefits. Was Jesus gay or did he just like wine? Find out tonight at 11.
We can learn a lot about repetitive intonational cliches if we unpack what Zach Starr there is parodying. So let's start briefly with Intonation 101. Obviously, speech doesn't have punctuation. But we do divide it up into intonation phrases, where each one of these phrases has one main pitch movement, called the nucleus, or the tonic, or sometimes the sentence stress. A phrase can be as small as just one syllable, like no. In fact, in dictionaries, all those audio clips are phrases, with the nuclear pitch movement, or nuclear tone, on the main stressed syllable. Dictionaries always use a falling nuclear pattern because that's the default intonation in English for a final or complete idea, a bit like a full stop or period.
Decide. Internet.
Environmentalism.
There are other nuclear tones, of course, like a rise, or a level, or a fall rise, or a kind of doorbell, all of which are common as non-final patterns, a bit like commas. But dictionaries always use a fall. Phrases, of course, are often longer than one syllable, with pre-nuclear and/or post-nuclear syllables. The pre-nuclear part by default is at a midish or fairly high pitch. After a falling nuclear tone, the post-nuclear part is down at the bottom or floor of the speaker's pitch range.
Environmentalism.
Now, the American TV news pattern that Zach Starr makes fun of divides each chunk of the script into a preparatory or setup phrase,
moments of humanity,
and a final or payoff phrase,
and hope,
with a comma-type nuclear tone on the setup,
humanity,
and some variety of falling tone on the payoff,
hope.
That kind of combination is very common. But the TV news pattern has extra features that Zach exaggerates. One is a dramatic pause between the setup phrase and the payoff phrase.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
Moments of humanity and hope.
James Earl Jones was a king.
An intimate and unique experience that never gets old.
Where the fires are mostly burning.
Tonight,
The fires
at 11.
are mostly burning.
Another key feature is a marked downshift in pitch shortly before you reach the final nuclear tones.
An intimate and unique experience that never gets old. That never gets old.
James Earl Jones was a king. Was a king.
Now, this downshifting shortly before the nuclear tone is something I hadn't paid that much attention to until it was pointed out to me by accent coach Adrian from Accent Amazing when I was making my video on out-of-date dictionaries.
There's also this kind of like, with the secondary stress in the sentence, it goes down. Like,
can you think of an example?
So, but most of his poetry was written under the Ottoman rule, kind of like that, in Persian and Arabic. So it kind of goes down when you say Persian and Arabic, as opposed to Persian and Arabic.
Oh, I see, yeah. This pre-nuclear downshift is practically epidemic on YouTube. And if I sound like I'm complaining about it, I should remember that people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
I think you do it as well in your videos. I'm not sure, but like...
Vocal fry is more or less that. Vocal fry isn't restricted to the end of sentences. Young American females of a certain type. Vocal fry is very often irregular, the aftermath of a falling intonation pattern. Former ABC reporter Amy Robach. But I don't think I use pre-nuclear downshift as relentlessly as some YouTubers.
On Her Majesty's Secret Service truly broke the mold. As it would see the Playboy secret agent finally fall in love and settle down, only for his new bride to be gunned down by Blofeld and his henchwoman Irma Bunt in a drive-by shooting at the end of the film, resulting in Bond's most vulnerable moment as he cries over her death. This would set the stage for the next film. Unfortunately, none of this would ever happen, as George Lazenby would leave the franchise after only one movie, opening the door for Sean Connery to return to the role in Diamonds Are Forever, which somewhat glossed over the previous film's events, robbing us of a satisfactory conclusion to the murder of Bond's wife. So let's dive in and find out what could have been his version of Diamonds Are Forever.
If we go back to our Intonation 101, we find that this downshifting can be applied to any of the three components: pre-nuclear, nuclear, and post-nuclear. Now, I said before that after a nuclear fall, the post-nuclear part of the phrase is down at the floor of the speaker's range. So how can you downshift that? Well, by going below the floor of the voice down into the cellar. In other words, vocal fry. That's what vocal fry is, a frequency that's so low we don't exactly hear it as a pitch so much as just a creaking sound. And what about downshifting the nuclear fall itself? Well, that means starting the fall at a pitch lower than the pre-nuclear pitch. This is definitely a thing. I talk about it in my book, where I called it the downstepped fall, pointing out that it was used a lot more in old received pronunciation than in modern SSB, not that it's died out. Some RP speakers used it more than others, and one of them was Margaret Thatcher. This was picked up on by Gillian Anderson when she played Margaret Thatcher on Netflix in The Crown.
Women in cabinet? No, certainly not. They become too emotional. Their background and lack of grit. There are ways of Britain being great again, and that is through a revitalized economy.
Now, if that intonation strikes you as utterly British and posh, think again.
You are about to embark on an extraordinary journey.
The night before Christmas.
Harry Tasker.
For one night.
James Cameron. Arnold Schwarzenegger. Jamie Lee Curtis.
Save the day.
Yes, that old movie trailer voice associated chiefly with the late Don LaFontaine.
I consider myself the luckiest person I'd ever met.
Often used downshifted or downstepped falling tones. The similarity can be quite close.
Extraordinary journey.
Revitalized economy.
The night before Christmas.
Become too emotional.
For Christmas.
Too emotional.
Harry Tasker.
Lack of grit.
Harry Tasker.
Lack of grit.
Why would there be this affinity between Margaret Thatcher and voiceover man? I don't think it's entirely accidental. Intonation often exhibits some sound symbolic features. Pitch has certain intrinsic associations. One of them is with physical size. Violins and mice make higher pitch sounds than double basses and hippos. Another association is with emotional arousal, excitement making us higher pitched and relaxation making us lower pitched. So when we downshift our intonation, inevitably there's some association, albeit faint, albeit unconscious, with on the one hand being bigger, grander, more weighty, and on the other hand being calmer, more in control of our emotions. And I think to some extent this is at work whichever part of the intonation phrase is downshifted, whether it's the pre-nuclear downshifting of TV news or so many YouTubers, including me sometimes, or the nuclear downshifting of Margaret Thatcher and voiceover man, or the post-nuclear downshifting of terminal vocal fry. Of the three, the one that's associated nowadays with young women is the post-nuclear kind, vocal fry. And as I said in my vocal fry video, I think that's part of what annoys people. Young, trendy women having the nerve to talk like they have authority, like they're in control, perhaps even sounding indifferent.
It's an affectation that annoying teenagers and rich people use to sound like they don't give a shit.
At the end of the day, no.
So the thing that Margaret Thatcher and voiceover man have in common is the expression of authority. I'm in command of the situation, I know everything, you just sit back for the ride. Now, believe it or not, you can actually combine calm, authoritative downshifting with a sense of excitement. One way of doing this is by preceding that Thatcherite downshifted fall with a rising pre-nuclear pitch. Not da-da-da-da-da, but da-da-da-da-da. And this brings us to my own biggest intonational allergy. It's the reason I can't listen to most British radio. For years and years now, this rising pitch followed by a downshifted fall has been inescapable, especially in station idents and radio adverts.
Classic FM.
Classical favourites.
LBC. Global Player.
The official Capital app. Music station.
Location sharing app.
The latest travel.
I'm Amelia Cox. Innocent Juice.
Slides into place.
Customer service.
Unbeatable prices.
Only 49p each. The 18th of September.
35 gig in our Europe zone. Usage policy apply. Data H2 2023. Majority of stores and online. T's and C's apply.
Of course, my radio nightmare is actually escapable. I can just avoid listening to the radio or restrict my diet to the more Thatcherian BBC Radio 4.
BBC News.
What's harder to escape is grocery shopping.
Free Traders multi-pack chicken bites are naturally high in protein. Convenient mini packs are available in southern-style flavours. Perfect for eating on the go. Pick up a multi-pack with your Tesco Club card for £2.25.
If you have a Morrison's 4 card, please scan it now. Thank you for shopping at Morrison's.
So far I've been focusing on one basic type of nuclear tone, the fall. But of course there are others like the rise, and rising intonation can also get people bothered, especially when it's used repeatedly and extra especially when people associate it with young women. I'm talking of course about uptalk. Uptalk is very often used by the same speakers who use vocal fry a lot.
Management, manage. Management, manage. Management, manage.
But uptalk has become incredibly widespread since it was associated with Valley Girls back in the 1980s. It's used across social groups by women and men of different generations and in different parts of the world. It's particularly associated with Australia, but you can certainly hear repetitive rising intonation from, say, Canadians.
JJ, fun ones, elementary school. Gen Xers up here, Canada. Guitar pedals, nostalgic item, notebooks, used, Canada. Interesting tale, books, 79. Object, Canada. Britain, UK. Beloved, Winnipeg.
I'll end with an intonation that to some extent boggles my mind, but which perhaps is a new trend. It involves not the fall or the rise, but the fall-rise tone. This starts like a fall, then bounces back up a bit at the end. It sounds like this, and it can be spread across several syllables.
Anyway!
It's widely used in various accents as a sort of comma. I use it a lot myself, and in American TV news we often get it in the setup phrase before the dramatic pause.
Humanity.
Experience.
Humanity.
Experience.
Now, if you'd asked me a few years ago if the fall-rise tone is ever used as a full-blown full stop, an indicator that the speaker has completed their main point, I'd have said not as far as I know. Some intonations just don't sound final.
In today's programme, we're going to ask why British place names are so hard to pronounce.
Is there an and coming?
No, I'm done.
But on YouTube, we can find even the fall-rise used repetitively, again and again and again, in both setup phrases and also in payoff sentences, completions, endings, where my brain at least is expecting a fall.
It might sound disgusting, but it was extremely valuable. Mining rights were quickly sold to Germany, who was the coloniser of Nauru at the time. The top side of the island was back then described in National Geographic as a ghastly tract of land, and while phosphorus mining had made the island a lot of money, most of it at this point had been claimed by the nations that held the island as their colony. City, ever, resource curse, wrong, scale, the long run, island, or feasible, industries, alive, pie, basis, today, American.
That's Australian English, but here in the south of England, where the fall-rise has long been more popular than in other parts of the English-speaking world, I've been hearing it more and more as the speaker's predominant intonation pattern.
Is it more difficult now, being a wife or girlfriend of a player?
Do you know what it is? Because I can play devil's advocate here, and I am married to someone that plays football for a living.
The abuse that you tell us about as a result of Brad's playing, sorry.
Brad having me as a wife makes his job harder.
The fitness levels of the players.
Yeah, 90 minutes is a lot, but then football's everywhere.
The guys aren't going out and getting drunk anymore.
I would be technically.
Because if they're not, we don't really see as much of that now.
No.
And this brings us back full circle to vocal fry, because many of these fashionable fall rises drop down into creak at the bottom or trough of the fall rise.
And I always have, so I'm going to turn up my volume now so you can hear that.
To keep up with that.
And what about the US? Well, when I was going back over my vocal fry video in preparation for this one, I noticed something I didn't fully register back then. One of the vocal fry users I discussed was reporter Johanna Mayer, who made an entire episode of Science Friday specifically about vocal fry. And when I listened again more closely to her vocal fry at the end of phrases, I realised an awful lot of the time she's using not falls, but fall rises.
It's when your voice drops down into a lower register. What's happening in my throat when I use vocal fry? A step further, public attention, physical harm, trying to project authority. Studies on vocal fry before use vocal fry, their gender, social standing, timing, there for centuries with exposure, word.
So is this taking off everywhere? Am I the only one who's not really noticed it? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching. This is the end. I've finished, except for crediting my patrons. You can watch something else now. Goodbye.